And are you able?
Yes.
And are you able to see the presentation? Okay.
Yes, I'm able to see that. If you want to make
Okay.
it full screen, that will be fine too, but this is excellent. I can see that well.
Oops.
This is fine, Susan.
Is it fine? Okay.
All right. So, uh, Dr. Hayes, Susan, welcome.
Thank you.
Today is October 2nd, 2024. And first of all, I want to thank you, Susan, for all of the hard work that you put in past couple of years working on your dissertation, collecting data in a foreign country. And here we are doing your dissertation defense. Dr. Hayes, thank you so very much for your help in providing your feedback to Susan and bringing her to this stage. Today, you will defend your dissertation, Susan. You will have about 30 to 40 minutes to present, and then we will open the floor for questions. And then we will end the presentation hopefully in about an hour.
Perfect. Thank you so much, first of all, Dr. Das and Dr. Hayes, for allowing me to present today. And I will have further kudos toward the end of my presentation, but I'll go ahead and get started for the sake of time. I am presenting today my defense of my study entitled Exploration of General Education Teacher Self-Efficacy regarding inclusive teaching strategies in a West African school. And so I'll begin my presentation by going over just a few items that we had previously discussed in the proposal stage, and then I'll dovetail into the methodology and the analysis piece. And finally, I'll talk a bit about the findings and how they aligned and how they impact, things such as social change, et cetera. And then I'll conclude with recommendations, talk a bit about limitations, and reflect on some pieces that I journaled with and took notes on, and open the floor for discussion following that. And so you see before you just a few pieces of the literature that were previously discussed, but these pieces outline and highlight the gap in literature regarding self-efficacy and inclusive education in specifically the Central Ghanaian uh, district. And so there's limited exploration of that, and this study sought to address those gaps in the literature and exploring um, the paradigm here that might determine the need for professional development as well. And so my rationale and importance of this study was to, first of all, impact the increasing population of students with disabilities matriculating in the Ghanaian districts, and in particular, in this case, Central Ghana, and add to that body of literature and hopefully increase the knowledge base regarding that. And so the purpose of my study, of course, is to explore and examine the general education teachers of a specific school and their perceived self-efficacy regarding the implementation of inclusive teaching strategies at the Central Ghanaian school that partnered with me. And so I used a qualitative paradigm in order to do this. I used two research questions here. And the first one, research question one, was what are general education teachers' perceptions of self efficacy in implementing inclusive teaching strategies at a school in Ghana? And research question two is what areas of inclusive education implementation in Ghana do teachers need professional development in? And the purpose of these questions was to prompt discussion and further explore the potential needs, if there were any, regarding professional development within that specific school. Driving this research was under social cognitive theory, which was grounded in the concept of behaviors being driven by vicarious experiences and also modeled behaviors, and dovetailing into the capacity at which those behaviors can be exhibited within specific environments. And so the concept of self-efficacy is derived from this. And in relation to teaching, that concept has as its grounding whether or not teachers are able to exhibit the capacity to exhibit certain behaviors within, in this particular case, an inclusive teaching environment. And so at the bottom, you see the cognitive theory broken down into 4 areas that are impacted by that, which is the indication of future behavior, the degree and capacity at which that behavior changes over a period of time, the ease of practice and whether that evolves with practice over time, and also the correlation of teacher effectiveness. And so again, the significance of my study is to enhance UNESCO's commitment to inclusive practices globally, but in particular in the Ghanaian region, and also to include or increase rather the knowledge base of literature regarding self-efficacy, but again, particularly geared toward this region. And also repeated attempts, of course, have been made to implement inclusive practices with the limited results. And so hopefully this research adds to the opportunity to change best practices and increase those results in terms of achievement. And so I chose the qualitative method for this study. It was most appropriate as it was based on exploration. And so the appropriate design that I chose for this was phenomenological, because it was based on the lived experiences of the teachers that participated in this study. And so I eliminated the possibilities of using the ethnographic and grounded theories and narrative theories, because they were based respectively on observance, construction of theory, and also related stories, which was not appropriate for this particular study. I incorporated ethical procedures in this study, and so I broke those down into 3 specific areas. The first one, the Belmont Report, which has as its premise respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And then respect for persons is simply making sure that confidentiality and anonymity are incorporated into the study. And it was in this particular case at a very high level. And then beneficence in this study was maximizing the benefits, such as providing a voice and minimizing risk, and also possibly having the outcome of implementing training according to the voice that the teachers express. And then justice had to do with my utilizing uniform guidelines and also making sure that participants were protected on that level. IRB approval, of course, was part of the ethical procedure here. And so there was particular attention for this study paid to participant safety, making sure that there were no adverse impacts on the teachers' performance and their position within the school for participating in this study. And also data security, making sure that there are barriers to access to the information that I garnered from each participant, and also making sure that that data is stored in a way that is accessible but encrypted over the 5-year period that Walden requires. And then finally, consents in both verbal and written formats were instituted for this study, which added to ethical procedures as well. And so the instrument that I used was a semi-structured interview, and I started off with several questions in the area of about 20 or so and whittled those down with the help of an expert panel. I had four doctoral level contributors to that. A couple of those contributors, excuse me, had qualitative expertise, and the others had special education along with qualitative expertise. And so I was able to get instrumental feedback regarding my initial questions and the strength of those questions, their alignment to the research questions, along with probing questions that might be added to those to extract information that was directly related to the two research questions. And so that was super helpful. And also, I was able to conduct a field test with those questions with a teacher in the Central Ghanaian region who worked in a similar demographic as a teacher there, and test those questions out and the procedure related to them. And so trustworthiness was also instituted, and an outcome of this study on 4 levels: credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability as well. In terms of credibility, member checking and reflexivity was a huge piece of this research. The member checking allowed for participants to look at the transcripts, make sure that things were picked up correctly by the software that I was using, and also interpreting and allowing participants rather to look at the captured data for preciseness. And then reflexivity allowed myself and even the participants as well to take a look at the process and also the data collected. And it also allowed me as well to do some note taking and journaling, et cetera, which helped to eliminate bias and contribute to the bracketing portion of the research. And then transferability was achieved through providing a detailed description of the various categories and codes that arose out of the research, and also provide unbiased information presentation that only encompassed the participants' perceptions and their statements, and not my opinions as well. And then dependability was established using uniform questioning and processes and procedures within the interview process, and making sure that the participants were reminded that everything was voluntary in nature at every point of the process. And then finally, confirmability was established by making multiple visits to the school, keeping an open portal of information with the participants, so that if they had questions or wanted to add data to what I had collected, or change any expressions of that data, they could absolutely reach out to me. And so they had a 14-day timeline in which they could look at the transcripts and pore over them. And I had a few participants say, this is what I really meant to say, or this is what I wanted to add to that data. And so that added to the confirmability of the trustworthiness. And so this is just a brief synopsis of the data collection technique, including the recruiting technique, whereby I got the permission letter, of course, with the partnering school, and forwarded that to the IRB. And upon approval of that, I was able to go and make an informal or in-person formal presentation to potential participants and staff, and along with a flyer that outlined the study and the criteria for participation, any allotment of compensation associated with that, et cetera, and how to contact myself and the IRB as well. And so from that, I was able to get consents. I mentioned before, both in verbal form and written as well, on the form and talk a little bit about the instrument that I would be using in the process as we talked about getting consent for that, and also the data collection process. And at the bottom, you see the software that I use, which was Otter AI. And so it was very reliable for the most part. But some of the challenges with that is that it picked up some of the dialect. And so my going in line by line became very essential in my review of the transcripts there. And so outside of that, and a few technical difficulties, I also used a backup recorder just in case, because you never can tell, especially, and the reliability of technology can sometimes be a little bit challenging. And so regarding the participants and the sample size, I spoke with general education teachers who had to be in an inclusive class setting. So that was very much an established criteria with them, and they had to confirm that for me. A minimum of 1 year of teaching experience. And my target sample size was 10 to 15. However, N equals 9 is what I ended up with. And that was appropriate for this particular study and the staffing resources that I had. And that in line with Bekele and Ago, who asserted that your sample size should really be representative of the study that you're doing and be appropriate for that study. And it's not so much the number, but more so the appropriateness of that study. But I will discuss the number of participants as, a slight limitation later on in this presentation. And so this is the demographic of the participants, each assigned an identifier. And I had two participants that I considered veterans at 15 and 22 years of experience, respectively. The gender distribution was pretty equitable there. We had 4 males and 5 females. And most of the participants came in at HND level in terms of education, which is higher national diploma certification, which upon discussion with the administration was the equivalent of the Western associates. My analysis execution was based on Brown and Clark's thematic analysis, 6-phase process. And of course, you're familiar with that, but just briefly, I wanted to reiterate that the review of the transcripts at the phase 1 process was very, very intricate. I won't say grueling, but intricate because of the software picking up sometimes dialect and misinterpreting that. So I had to very carefully listen to the audio, go in line by line. And so phase 1 was a very rigorous process for me. And then from that, categorization began, numerous categories. I believe initially research 1 started off with about maybe 15 categories, and research question 2 had maybe 7 or 8. And then from that, I was able to synthesize and come up with initial themes from that, getting me to phase 3 and further synthesizing and whittling that down to finally phase 5, refining that and coming up with 3 themes per each research question, taking me into the ability to write my report. And so now I'll talk a little bit about my findings, and I'll divide my discussion up by research question. And just a little reminder, you'll see there of what the research question was for research question 1. And the themes that I derived from that were adversity in inclusive classrooms, factors impacting self-efficacy, and finally, perceived self-efficacy to implement instruction. And so if you look at the table there, just simply indicates that all 9 participants contributed responses to that. and that of the numerous responses that I got, I was able to whittle it down to 113 key responses, whereby I was able to extract information that fortified each of these themes. And so in terms of adversity in the classroom, it aligns with the conceptual theory that adversity is a part of the process in which teachers must demonstrate behaviors of self-efficacy in alignment with those circumstances and be able to exhibit a particular capacity to implement instruction, in this case, in the inclusive setting. And so each of the participants contributed something to this, even though just a few are highlighted here. But in use the query feature of in vivo, it allowed me to hone in on frequent words used in particular themes. And so one of the words that came up consistently and was a frequent flyer, so to speak, in this particular theme was the word challenging or challenge. And so this is what let me know that I had tapped into a specific area that had a repetitive occurrence in their responses. And so here you see just a few of the responses here. For instance, participant 1 talks about student behaviors and how sometimes they can be a bit challenging in the class. Participant 7 talks about resources and support in the classroom as being a challenge or an adverse situation to kind of work around in implementing instruction. And then there were quite a few statements related to social emotional adversity among students. And so you see some of them here, with participant 1 stating that some students often have emotional feelings when they're interacting with their peers, that people don't like them, etc. And so their responses to instruction or how they interact throughout the day might be impacted. Participant 9 talks about describing the adversity of disruption in the classroom, also that stems from social emotional behaviors that prevent adversity. Factors impacting self-efficacy was a theme. And so I kind of divided that up into 6 areas here. Pre-existing deficiencies would be behaviors or deficiencies that students present upon entry into the classroom environment. And so that was a frequent response area. And teachers talked about coming into the classroom with factors such as literacy issues or social emotional issues that tie into the next area, which is home and family dynamic. And so every participant actually out of the 9 made a reference to the family dynamic having a significant impact on their ability to demonstrate their capacity to teach in and around that. And so that was a significant factor, along with preparation and reflexivity or self-reflexivity about their performance. And they shared stories with me regarding successes in the classroom, but also not so much some failures in the class in implementing instruction. They were very candid and transparent about sharing that with me, but it presented them with an opportunity to reflect on their teaching strategies and maybe go back and retool some things. So that was a factor that it affected their capacity to instruct in the classroom. Also, variety in assignment was a surprising factor that they expressed, which highlighted their being able to shift in terms of content that they taught or levels that they taught at. So they found that as something that was very motivational to their ability to provide instruction in the inclusive classroom. And the last one was character and attitude. A lot of teachers talked about walking into the classroom with certain attributes that contributed to their capacity to implement instruction. And one of the buzzwords that came up frequently was having patience. And so a few participants talked about that, how that contributes to um, the student not feeling as though they're not catching on or failing in that particular instance. And the last theme, perceived self-efficacy to implement instruction. I found 6 areas that I was able to subcategorize under that theme. And the first one is the capacity to modify instruction. Teachers expressed a high level of ability to um, accommodate students through shifting of approaches, if you will, to instruction. And so some of those included um, questioning and changing how they question students in order um, to extract that information and move the student toward mastery. In other words, um, changing pacing was another one. One of the participants, participant one in particular, said, I need to slow down the teaching or break down the curriculum. And so that leads into several other comments or responses that talked about scaffolding, etc. And then the ability to implement cooperative strategies was a really big streamlined response across the board for all participants. There was always some response that included grouping students or using collaborative or cooperative teaching, peer-to-peer teaching, etc. And so here, again, you see some of the responses and quotes from the participants there regarding that. Facilitating summative and formative assessment was a perceived area of self-efficacy in the inclusive classroom. And so they talked about icebreakers being implemented. Participant 2 in particular talks about doing a 2-minute activity in which they're able to gauge whether students have recall of information or they need to reteach. And then participant 7 talked about giving an actual assessment that's, pretty boilerplate and traditional in terms of just asking students if they remember certain concepts. Utilization of visual materials was also a huge one with the participants. And so they expressed a high value of utilizing tangibles and visual materials whereby students can relate the materials with some teaching and learning material that was flowing throughout the classroom. And so TLM was a buzz phrase or word or acronym, if you will, that was used a lot in teacher responses. That seems to be pervasive throughout the school. Student-centered instruction was the 5th subcategory. And so they expressed being able to set aside time for students who maybe were not catching on in the inclusive classroom, and utilizing another acronym that they brought forth, CCAL, which is Child-Centered Active Learning. And so I'll talk a little bit later about some of the training that they have received, once-off training that they received. And this is one of those areas that they seem to be utilizing at the school on a high level. And finally, implementing interdisciplinary instruction, which is their way of merging together content areas and making learning a little bit more meaningful and across the board and streamlined between content areas. So one example was a story that one of the participants gave that fell into the history class that he was teaching, where he was teaching about Kwame Nkrumah. and the history during his term in office there as president. And so the students were having a hard time catching on. And so he decided to integrate into that literacy subject the paradigm of art and also drama. And so he was able to splice up the historic timeline and assign that to groups, once again, the utilization of cooperative learning. And so they were able to act out the various points of history. They were able to draw visuals depicting different events within that history story. And so doing a cross-categorical or cross-content merging there was very helpful and very impactful in teaching that lesson. So moving into findings for research question 2, here the focus was on the training and professional development piece. My themes were previous training experience, perceived need for training, and also specific areas needed for professional development. And in the table, you can see all 9 participants made contributions to the responses, and I streamlined that down into 36 key responses. And so in the area of previous training and experience, what I found in the responses was that teachers received training, but it was mostly once-off type training. And so they expressed in their responses that they received training in things such as child-centered active learning, or they received training in strategies in inclusive classroom, but it wasn't training that was, as we may know it, assessed for impact at the beginning of the year, the middle, and the end. It was a once-off thing, and you went in and you utilized that strategy, and there was no real follow-up with that from any body of administration per se on the effectiveness of that particular training. So there's no real streamlined process to the previous training that they received. Most of the training that they expressed was at the beginning of the year. No one expressed previous training or training happening at a significant level at the pre-service level. And so that was something that I highlighted as well. Every participant in this study perceives training as beneficial and needed in order to develop. These are some of the comments that were made within the responses, but they're very much an affirmative in terms of professional development and seeing that being a bit more a part of their growth in their profession, so to speak. And so some of the responses that I highlighted here that stood out to me was participant two's response, which stated, when we get it from professionals like psychologists, et cetera, or someone who understands their issue, the professional might write an instant solution that they can utilize. Another person stated that, participant 6 in particular stated that when we do in services and training for teachers, that we have an opportunity basically to learn from one another and be collaborative. So each person expressed their own reasons for wanting professional development, and all participants expressed that it is needed as well as beneficial. And so specific areas needed for professional development were divided up into 3 areas that I found most pertinent, and that's special skills, child psychology, and classroom strategies. And so regarding special skills, when I asked them what specific PDs you would like to see, they indicated that they would love training regarding how to assess student thought patterns. And they also expressed, two participants in particular expressed a need for technologically based training. One of those participants specifically highlighted AI training, which I'll dive into a little bit when I get to another area. But it was really refreshing to hear that, firstly, they're keeping up with trends in technology. I know AI is a big one nowadays, and that they really want to implement that as a special skill that might enhance learning and also increase their self-efficacy in implementing instruction. And interestingly enough, participant 8 talked about learning to teach the English language a little bit better, because a lot of the students at the school, their primary language is the culturally tribal language that they speak. And so the English is not necessarily as proficient as that language, which for most of them would probably be Tree. Child psychology was an interesting area that came up frequently in the responses, and so I decided to highlight that as a subcategory for specific areas. And I found that teachers are really specifically interested in learning the sources of student social emotional needs. And so they would like for someone to come in and basically tell them why students behave the way they do, what are some of those sources, and how they could go about navigating that within the classroom in order to be more effective in the inclusive classroom. And I mentioned earlier that that was one of the adversities that they had to kind of work around in order to be impactful and effective in that classroom. And finally, the last category under the theme, classroom strategies, of course. Again, there's interest in learning to teach ELA at a higher level. Just general overall support is needed in how to support the students that are struggling within their classrooms. And also just training as to how to diversify and differentiate education so that students at the higher level that are mastering concepts don't get lost in the shuffle, but that everybody gets a little something out of the instruction. Also, participant 5 specifically mentioned a course and a method to teach learners so that they'll be able to achieve what the government is expecting, which is always something that from Western standpoints, we kind of, you know, wave off a little bit because it kind of stifles creativity sometimes. But this particular participant and teacher was interested in working with government mandates and making sure that those were met. In terms of alignment and implications, I spliced that into 4 areas, excuse me, the first being theory, and just aligning that with Bandura's social cognitive theory and the construct of self-efficacy as being characterized by behaviors specifically in adverse environments. And the findings were able to align with that, specifically indicating that ongoing research would be highly encouraged regarding inclusive classrooms in Central Ghana. And then in terms of practice, the data that I received kind of set the groundwork for the design of professional development. And I believe through that, that will improve best practices and also increase the opportunity for self-efficacy to be heightened. And finally, policy, or not finally, but policy was an area of alignment, and it supported the continuation of reform through this study. And it highlighted the need for professional development through teachers' expression of needs that they have. And so it kind of supports that policy to continue to support professional development, which will prepare teachers um, and provide them with inclusive teaching strategies that will propel them forward. And then finally, social change. I believe the study aligned and contributed to social change by propelling students toward post-secondary success ultimately, which would impact the areas of education, employment, and independent living. And so by providing access to the curriculum and to varied ways of being accommodated and having curriculums modified, students will ultimately uh, progress academically, and then at the post-secondary level, they're able to become productive citizens of their respective communities. And further in discussing social change, I thought I'd just put a few extra points in there because of Walden's commitment to social change in their mission, that this study has the possibility of having a local community impact by sharing the results of this study with other schools in the area, officials in the area that govern various mandates, et cetera. And then the opportunity to publish the findings so that they can be shared throughout the region or the school community is a possibility that might impact social change, and targeting professional development so that schools can increase the quality of instruction. And so disseminating the results of this study will take place by reporting out to key stakeholders, which in this case originally would be administration and the participants. And so my goal in reporting would be to provide a continued voice to participants and to let them know how their responses inform this study and its findings, and also to brainstorm and work on solutions with administration and the participants to move forward. And finally, to prompt discussion for opportunities for specific professional development in the areas expressed as needs. So recommendations for future practice, first of all, exploring self-efficacy at the pre-service level. I reiterated in the proposal that the literature talks about the 4 major universities in Ghana whose curriculum is not very targeted toward preparing teachers to enter into the inclusive classroom. And so there's limited inclusion of content in the coursework, and also there's limited opportunity for field experiences as well. And so future practice recommendations for this particular component would be reporting findings back to appropriate personnel at universities if allowed to do so, and having them maybe do some reflective practices in terms of maybe retooling and designing programs there for teacher training. And then, of course, providing targeted professional development, again, as I mentioned, would be a future practice so that that training has meaning to that particular school and thus affects the outcome of student achievement overall. And finally, another recommendation that I thought of would be to empower teachers to move toward instructional leadership. And so by providing that targeted professional development, teachers are empowered to go out and become the leaders and become the trainers in their respective schools or maybe outside of the school, and it further develops them as a professional. Limitations of the study was a small sample size, and because of the size of the school, the sample size n equals 9 was appropriate, but it does not represent the larger scope of that region. or the Central Ghanaian region. And so that was a limitation. And so it presents the study as kind of a microcosm of what might be going on in other schools in the area. Also, the time allotted and resources by which I was limited in terms of coordinating communications between participants and myself was challenging, in that I did not want to infringe upon their planning and personal time as well. And so there was that balance that presented some challenges that I did navigate. And just including a broader criteria or a different criteria in this study. I only included elementary teachers, and the study was limited to general education teachers as well, of all years of experience. And so a possible expansion of this limitation would be to hone in on the larger population size, or including several schools in the study, as opposed to simply one. So some reflections and concluding thoughts that I have. These are just things that during my bracketing procedure that I just jotted down in my journal and note taking, but they included just the observation of how schools in that rural area do not represent what we may see on the Western in terms of resources and supports. But there are some similarities that I found that are global. And so in this particular instance with this participating school, I would consider it an underserved school. And so they're not privy and accessible to certain things such as unions or clinicians that come in, and funding even. And that kind of aligns with what we see in the Western world. With myself coming from the fourth largest district in the US, we still see that skew of resources and their allocation between schools that are in more affluent neighborhoods or are considered special schools or high performing schools, getting the lion's share of the resources in underserved communities, sometimes not getting that. And so you see that dichotomy, or parallel, I should say, between Central Ghana and this particular partnering school, and also what we see on a global level in other regions. I also reflected on how being on site and interacting with potential participants and seeing how they operate in their element brought various sources of reflection, and it leads me to the next point of how I noticed how familial the structure is, being such a small structure, and how teachers know their community and have relationships with parents and various businesses in the community, and the level of respect and the flow over of customs is very apparent there. And teachers are sometimes referred to by their surnames, or sometimes they're referred to by Mama so and so or Nana so and so. So I thought that was really awesome how that flows over into the community there. And I mentioned in my conclusion of my dissertation how I felt that the participants and the teachers had what we refer to in the States as heart. And so they are able to accomplish so much and build a collegial environment whereby, they're able to work around and work with some of the adversity that comes with teaching in the inclusive classroom setting. And so I want to just thank the two of you for hanging in there with me. And Dr. Das, you've been there from the beginning of my studies. And so I really appreciate your support and you're allowing me to take deep dives into all of my research and not just throwing answers at me, but just, allowing me to reflect and do the research and engage in this study. And Dr. Hayes, I absolutely thank you for coming on board after the process had started and believing in the relevance of this study and my research and seeing it through to the end. So I thank you so much for that. Just a few references that were included, but now I would like to defer to you all for any discussion or questions that you may have regarding my study. That concludes my presentation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Susan. At this time, if you don't mind, yeah, you can stop sharing your screen, and if needed, we will ask you to pull up your PowerPoint. First of all, thank you for choosing this topic. Much needed research coming from that part of the world. We have so much research, coming from the West on the topic of inclusion, teacher self-efficacy, but taking it to, that part of the world, physically going there. So I'm sure you found this experience satisfying, and it was reflected in your commentary that you were making. So I'm sure from this experience you developed professionally as well, and contributed and will contribute with your writing.
Yes. Awesome. Yes, this was quite engaging. I have been visiting the continent pretty much since 2017. And so I was able to develop some relationships over time. And when I started matriculating at Walden um, and got to the point of developing a topic, I just kind of organically wondered how I could merge my interests with academics. And so that's how I arrived at this study. So thank you very much.
Very nice. At this time, I will ask Dr. Hayes to ask any questions, make any comments, provide any suggestions, and then I will come to my part. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hayes.
Yes, thank you, Susan. That was well done. I just have some couple comments.
Sure.
I do have a couple questions that are not deal breakers for this, but for something for you to think about. The first one being to rethink this notion of limitation, because there are studies in qualitative research. And there's been a revolution in qualitative research back when I was a doctoral student many moons ago, where, I mean, I've done studies that have ends of one. And I don't think that's a limitation, because I'm talking about this particular person at this particular time with this particular experience. And so I would, as you are thinking about moving this beyond where you are right now, is that you are talking about a group of people in this group, in this particular place at this particular time. I personally don't think it's a limitation. And so I would just, and I think when you say that that's a limitation, it really limits the expectation that you could probably do with that. This is the question. So why did you find it necessary to align what you're doing here with the colonized standards of the U.S.?
It was an observation. So when I mentioned that, that was on the slide of just kind of reflection. And so it was something that I thought about because I come from a lens of 25 plus years experience, having been an instructor and also a case manager, and just having seen that dynamic play out. And so it was just interesting how that paradigm was true of what might be seen as a really limited pool by which resources should go or normally goes within the Central Ghanaian region. Because when we say rural, we're talking rural in terms of accessibility to things that we take sometimes for granted here. For instance, I'll give you one example that I just thought of today that I didn't include, was that during the pandemic, in the district that I came from and have experience in, well, even in the neighborhood that I worked with, which was, could be considered underserved, every student had a laptop. Every student had Wi-Fi. If they didn't have it, the district was able to put that into the home. That was not so in Central Ghana. They went home, that was it. And so if teachers or administrators even were able to communicate with parents, et cetera, regarding continuation of learning, it was done by dropping things off at the house. It was done by, going to different homes and just communicating and seeing how the students were doing and try to, continue learning that way so students didn't regress. And it was, super difficult, if not ineffective. And so, yeah, those were some things that I thought about, how resources are poorly distributed in their own way, even in on Western fronts and on the Central Ghanaian front as well. So it shows up differently, but it's the same, kind of animal there.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks for asking. Great questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes. Couple of thoughts, Susan. You have been in the profession for quite some time. And when we are in the profession, when we know ins and outs of the demands of meeting the needs of special needs children, we form certain types of, I'm not using the word baggage, but some type of, background, right? So when you were conducting this study and when you were interviewing these participants from, from a different country, how are you managing your own biases, or when you were analyzing the data? So in all of those stages, what was your, process, and how you handled that?
Well, I handled that firstly by reminding myself throughout the process that I am capturing and reporting data that was communicated to me, and not to interject my own opinion, or even in the interviewing process, not nodding or, showing physical approval of what was saying, or prompting people to express themselves in a certain way. So, that was part of it, and reminding myself and the participants as well that my role as a listener and a transcriber was it, and not to interject my personal experiences from my past experiences in the States. And so that is what I did along the way, to kind of audit how I collected that material, how I allowed in vivo to aggregate it, and how I interpreted that those responses, and just simply reported those responses as they were, and not according to my experience and how I felt about them. This is what they said, and this is what I felt it meant. Not this is what they said and this is how I think it should go, kind of thing. Even though some things were touched on in recommendations, those recommendations were not so much, this is what I think the school ought to do, but this is how I think the study should continue, and how it could be broadened. in terms of moving forward and having a future impact on the school, firstly, and perhaps in the area, but on the school first and foremost. So there was some auditing and checks and balances that I had to do, and some reflexivity as well after and even during each interview to make sure that the probing questions even weren't geared toward what I think they should say or anything like that, but just to get more streamlined information that relates to the research question.
Thank you. Thanks for expanding on that. And I'm glad you mentioned about your own body language. You were mindful of your tone of your voice, because sometimes just our own body language or even tone or intonation of our voice can sway the participant to say one thing or the other, right? So that's important.
Yes.
Within elementary grades, right, there are variations. Um, Perceptions of teachers who are perhaps teaching early elementary versus teaching fifth or sixth grade. Some elementary schools, they go up to sixth grade. I don't know what grade level was it in Ghana. Did you find any kind of, could you compare and contrast, say, some participants who taught at an early elementary grades versus those who taught at upper elementary? Were there any differences in their responses?
I didn't take a deep dive into that because that's a whole other dissertation. But I did notice that the challenges, and when I talked about adversities, some of those, they showed up in different ways. For instance, if you had a early primary teacher, some of the behaviors spoken about that were adverse behaviors were amongst those grades. And a lot of it has to do with it's not just students who may be acting out or showing social emotional deficiencies because they're struggling with the academic piece. It could also be just an immaturity and students learning how to engage and integrate themselves into the classroom environment, especially after the pandemic, because several studies have shown that even in, on the Western Front, that students came back differently, social emotionally, after the pandemic. And so it was no different for that population in Central Ghana, especially for the younger students. And so that was one of the differences and dichotomies that I saw between levels. And that was the key one that I saw. In terms of teachers having motivation to navigate the process of instruction in inclusive classrooms and wanting to learn more about strategies, that was pretty much across the board.
That's interesting to hear. And my research area is inclusive education in developing countries, and I have conducted similar research, so I'm not surprised to hear what you found. Needing looking for more professional development opportunities, more trainings, more strategies in the toolbox, all of those. Great.
Yeah, in addition to that, more support, because teachers cannot be social workers and clinical psychologists. It contributes to burnout, turnover, and everything else, as we know. And so it will be an interesting discussion to have with administration to find out what the possibilities of getting clinical support in there, what that looks like for that type of school. What kind of access do they have to such personnel? What kind of budget do they have to support that? Is that a thing, so to speak, in Central Ghana that has been discussed amongst policymakers and administrators within that district. So that'll be an interesting discussion as I talk about with the administration, what do you have access to and what do you need, and
All right.
moving forward. Mhm.
Yeah, that leads to my second point. You mentioned that findings of this study should be shared with administrators, perhaps participants who participated in this study. I would highly encourage you to share the findings of this study with wider audience. There are conferences, international conferences, maybe in that part of the world or within the United States or in the Western context. There are some conferences that are held, and oftentimes when I go to those conferences, there is very little research coming out of that part of the world. So now you have this rich data that you gathered, and you will be in a position to share the findings of your study so that people in the West they are more aware, as well as it will highlight the need for the supports that you are talking about in those developing countries. So, and also I will encourage you to publish, not only present at conferences, write journal article. At least you can write 2 to 3 publications from your dissertation. And if you need any help, I'll be happy to assist. Your committee, will be there to support you in that endeavor. Um, I always say that when we finish our dissertation, it should not, that knowledge gained should not be sitting in our dissertation on our office shelf. It should be shared with others. Highly,
I
highly.
absolutely, I agree with that. One opportunity that I do have forthcoming in 2025 is a travel kind of symposium for educators that is coming up in July, where some of us have been invited to come out and visit a few schools that have special populations and take a look at strategies, possibly do a presentation and sit down and talk to hopefully a representative from the Ministry of Education at that time. So I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to the conversation that I'll have with administration and teachers coming up. And then ideally, I would love to have an opportunity to talk to personnel at the various universities that were included in my study and talk to them without being culturally rude and intrusive about how we can expand the university programming to be more inclusive of field experiences and specific trainings, and maybe seeing if I can help there humbly.
That's an important point that you made, Susan. Making sure that we are culturally responsive.
Absolutely.
Although we understand Western context well, we should not be imposing those values or our practices because they are practicing certain things because of their own context, right? As we know, inclusion requires lots of resources, right, in order to be successful, right? So they are doing their best, but maybe present them with, hey, this is, an alternate model that you can, take a look at. So no, that's very nice. And I was pleased to hear, in your, when you said you present that humbly, that is very important. That
Yes.
we do not be we are not in a position to impose anything to people in other countries and other contexts.
Absolutely. We are in someone else's house, so to speak. I remind myself continually throughout this study. So, yes, thank you.
All right. I don't have any other comments, Dr. Hayes. Was there anything else?
That's all I had was those couple of questions that I asked.
Okay, great. I did make notations. Thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback.
Hey, all right, Susan. Congratulations. Celebrate. I don't know what time it is for you. I know you are still in Africa, right? In that part of the world.
I am in Johannesburg, and it is 11:15 at night, and I'm
Sorry to keep you.
just thrilled to be up doing this. So, just wondering what next steps are, what the status is, and
Yeah. So after this, I will send the recording to doctoral study, and then they will put that in task stream. And I think then it will kick in. Your dissertation has already been reviewed for form and formatting. I think you are at the very end. This is an important milestone, Susan, for anyone who has gone through this doctoral journey. So breathe easy, relax, and celebrate.
awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
labor of your hard work. It has been an absolute pleasure working with you, and I look forward to working with you in the future. If you would like to present at a conference, write some journal articles or anything.
Absolutely. I would love to continue and expand the research, and thank you so much. I'm going to humbly assume I have passed the dissertation portion.
You have you certainly.
Okay,
Yeah,
greatly. Great,
you
great. Thank you so
of
much.
yeah,
Right.
and
Excellent, excellent. Good to hear. Good to hear. I will look then for communication from you regarding next steps. And once again, I thank you both profusely for hanging in there with me. It has been a process, but it has been a very beneficial and great learning process for me.
yeah,
And I thank you
we,
so much.
we kept the bar high all the time, Susan. I want you to know.
I
It
appreciate
is
that.
not a standard practice to have a field study done. When I asked you, you gladly did it. And that I'm sure that helped you to prepare you for your, later interviews.
It did. It really did. And it let me know, it was encouraging and let me know that it could be done on a broader scale and it wasn't a pipe dream. So thank you so much. And I will look forward to further communication regarding what I should do to finalize everything. And
Sure.
that's great. Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you, Dr. Hayes, for all your help and support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Good night.
Bye. Bye. Good night.